What if Atlantis was not the first great civilization to fall? What if before the legendary destruction of Atlantis, there was something even older, even greater, and completely erased from history? Ancient texts speak of a catastrophe so powerful that the sky burned, the oceans rose, and an entire civilization vanished without a trace. Not weakened, not conquered, but completely wiped out. This forgotten world thrived long before Atlantis. Its towers shimmered with light, its knowledge rivaled the stars, and its mastery of energy seemed limitless. They believed themselves eternal, building monuments that defied time, harnessing forces that modern science still struggles to explain. But eternity is fragile. The catastrophe struck suddenly. Fire rained from above, oceans surged without mercy, and the land itself trembled as though rejecting its inhabitants. In a single generation, the great society was erased. No ruins remained above ground, no monuments survived intact. Only whispers carried forward through myth and memory. Yet fragments endure, symbols carved into stone, stories passed down across cultures, and teachings attributed to Thoth himself. All hint at survivors who carried forbidden knowledge across oceans. Survivors who may have seeded the brilliance of Atlantis with wisdom from a world already destroyed. But what caused the destruction? Was it war? A celestial impact? A divine punishment? Or a cycle of resets that humanity keeps forgetting? Tonight, we begin the journey into that forgotten age. The civilization before Atlantis, the catastrophe that ended it, and the terrifying possibility that history is repeating itself right now. And hey, if you love mythology and history from all cultures and forbidden ancient stories, subscribe, because this channel reveals the secrets behind every myth. And let me know from where you're watching. I want to see how far these whispers travel. Atlantis has long been celebrated as the pinnacle of lost civilizations, the crown jewel of myth and mystery. But what if it was never the beginning? What if Atlantis was simply the heir to something older, something greater, something already erased by catastrophe? Fragments of evidence suggest exactly that. Survivors of a forgotten world carried knowledge across oceans, embedding it into the foundations of Atlantis. Their wisdom was not born in Atlantis's marble halls, but inherited from a civilization that had already fallen. Look closely at the ruins scattered across continents. Architectural echoes appear where no contact should have existed. Massive stone blocks aligned with celestial precision, monuments built to withstand time, and myths of fire from the sky repeated in cultures separated by thousands of miles. These are not coincidences. They are fingerprints of a lost world. The teachings attributed to Thoth whisper of this inheritance. He spoke of knowledge preserved through catastrophe, of wisdom carried forward by those who survived. Atlantis, radiant and proud, may have been built upon the ashes of a civilization even more advanced, one whose brilliance was undone by forces beyond comprehension. But here lies the chilling truth. If Atlantis inherited this knowledge, it also inherited the curse. The same patterns of pride, the same reliance on fragile systems, the same blindness to warning signs. And just as the first civilization was erased, Atlantis too met its end. So the question remains, if Atlantis was not the first, how many times has humanity risen and fallen? How many civilizations have been erased, leaving only whispers behind? The story of Atlantis is not the beginning. It is the continuation of a cycle far older than we dare to imagine. Deep within forgotten archives, fragments of ancient records whisper of a world erased from memory. These brittle texts, etched in fading ink and carved into stone, describe a civilization that rose long before Atlantis, a society whose brilliance rivaled the stars themselves. They speak of towers that glowed with energy, of machines that harnessed the forces of nature, and of skies mapped with precision beyond modern astronomy. This was not myth. It was memory preserved in fragments, scattered across continents, waiting to be pieced together. But alongside descriptions of grandeur, the records carry warnings. They tell of fire descending from the heavens, oceans rising without mercy, and land swallowed whole. The catastrophe was not gradual. It was sudden, violent, absolute. A single generation witnessed the end of everything they had built. Some texts suggest divine punishment, claiming the gods struck down the arrogant. Others hint at celestial impact, a force from beyond the stars that shattered the earth. A few whisper of cycles, resets that erase civilizations when pride blinds them, leaving only fragments for the next to inherit. The records are incomplete, torn by time, but together they paint a chilling picture. Before Atlantis, there was another world, a world undone by catastrophe so powerful it left only whispers behind. And if these records are true, then Atlantis was not the beginning. It was the echo of something far older, a fragile attempt to preserve brilliance from a civilization already destroyed. The question lingers: how many times has humanity risen and fallen, erased by forces beyond comprehension? And are we living in yet another cycle, blind to the warnings carved into stone? Long before Atlantis, before the myths we know today, there was a dawn unlike any other. A forgotten civilization rose from obscurity, shaping the world with brilliance that seemed far beyond its time. They were not primitive, they were visionaries. Their cities shimmered with light, their monuments aligned with the stars, and their mastery of energy defied the limits of nature. They harnessed forces hidden deep within the earth, channeling power through crystalline structures that pulsed with life. To them, the world was not a mystery. It was a system to be understood, controlled, and perfected. Their society thrived in harmony with the cosmos. They mapped the heavens with precision, charting cycles of stars and planets that modern science only rediscovered millennia later. Their knowledge of mathematics and geometry was woven into every structure, every pathway, every temple. Nothing was random. Everything was deliberate. But their brilliance was not only in stone and science. They cultivated a culture of wisdom, passing knowledge through generations with reverence. Their leaders were not kings of conquest, but guardians of balance. They believed themselves eternal, destined to rise above the fragility of time. And yet, eternity is fragile. The rise of this society carried with it the seeds of its downfall. Their reliance on power, their confidence in mastery, their belief that they had conquered nature itself, all of it blinded them to the warnings that surrounded them. The skies carried omens, the oceans whispered of change, and the earth trembled with subtle signs. But they did not listen. For now, though, in this chapter of history, they stood radiant, a civilization before Atlantis, rising to heights that seemed untouchable. Their brilliance was unmatched, their vision unchallenged. They were the first advanced society, and their story was only beginning. The rise of the first advanced society was marked by towering monuments, celestial wisdom, and extraordinary technology, seeming to belong to another age. Their cities pulsed with energy drawn from the earth. Crystalline conduits glowed, channeling forces modern science still struggles to replicate. These were not simple tools, but systems of mastery, bending nature to human will. Imagine vast platforms levitating without wheels, gliding silently across the land. Imagine towers shimmering with light, their surfaces alive with energy, serving as both monuments and machines. Imagine networks of canals that resonated with frequencies, stabilizing the very ground beneath them, more than just carrying water. This civilization unlocked secrets of vibration, resonance, and energy flow. They understood the world as a symphony of frequencies, learning to tune themselves. Their machines were powered not by fire or metal, but by harmony with the earth and sky. Even their medicine reflected this brilliance. Records hint at healing chambers using sound and light to restore balance within the body. Illness was treated with precision, aligning the human form with the same forces that powered their cities. To outsiders, it seemed like magic. To them, it was science, so advanced it blurred the line between natural and divine. But brilliance carries danger. Reliance on these systems made them vulnerable. When catastrophe struck, their defining technology became unstable. Towers collapsed, conduits shattered, and the harmony they had mastered turned against them. For now, though, in this chapter of their story, they stood unmatched. Their technology was beyond its time, a glimpse into what humanity could achieve, and a warning of how fragile such achievements can be. The first advanced society believed itself eternal. Its towers shimmered with power, its monuments aligned with the stars, and its mastery of energy seemed unshakable. But the sky began to change. At first, it was subtle. Strange lights appeared on the horizon, flickering like distant fires. The people dismissed them as natural phenomena, harmless and fleeting. Yet the lights grew brighter, stretching across the heavens in patterns no astronomer could explain. Then came the storms. Thunder rolled without clouds, lightning struck in silence, and the skies glowed with colors unseen before. The priests warned that these were omens, signs of imbalance between the earth and the heavens. The scholars argued they were celestial anomalies, perhaps the approach of a wandering star. But the rulers, blinded by pride, dismissed them all. Night after night, the warnings intensified. Stars shifted from their ancient positions, constellations twisted into unfamiliar shapes, and shadows stretched across the land, even when the sun was high. The people grew restless, whispering that the heavens themselves were rebelling. Animals sensed it too. Birds abandoned their nests, migrating in chaotic patterns. Herds refused to graze, staring instead at the trembling horizon. Even the oceans seemed to respond. Tides rising unpredictably, waves crashing against shores without wind to drive them. The sky was no longer a canvas of beauty. It had become a messenger of catastrophe. And yet, the rulers clung to their certainty. "We are eternal," they declared. "The heavens cannot undo us." But eternity is fragile, and the warnings above were not to be ignored. The civilization stood radiant, yet fragile. The sky had spoken, carrying omens of fire, imbalance, and collapse. The catastrophe was approaching, and the heavens were the first to reveal it. The warnings in the sky had been ignored. Rulers declared themselves eternal, priests silenced doubts, and people clung to stability. But eternity is fragile. and the first tremors of destruction had already begun, unnoticed beneath the surface. It started with the earth. Subtle vibrations rippled beneath the cities, shaking foundations that had stood for centuries. At first, they were dismissed as minor disturbances, nothing more than the natural shifting of land. But the tremors grew stronger, resonating through the crystalline conduits that powered the civilization. Towers flickered, canals surged, and the harmony they had mastered began to falter. Then came the fire. Strange streaks of light tore across the heavens, burning trails that lingered. The people gathered in awe, believing them to be celestial wonders, a beautiful spectacle. But the scholars saw something else, fragments of a greater body hurtling toward the earth. Their warnings were drowned out by pride, by the belief in their own invincibility. The oceans responded next. Tides rose unpredictably. Waves crashed against shores without wind. Harbors trembled, as though pulled by forces beyond the moon. Fishermen abandoned their boats, whispering that the sea itself was rebelling, turning against them. The catastrophe was no longer distant. It had begun, a terrifying reality. Fear spread through the streets. Families fled inland, seeking refuge from the chaos. Priests chanted desperately in temples, while rulers argued endlessly in their chambers. Some claimed divine punishment, others insisted on celestial impact. A few whispered of cycles, resets that erased civilizations when pride blinded them, a recurring pattern. But no answer could stop what was unfolding. The first advanced society, radiant and proud, was standing at the edge of collapse. The catastrophe had begun in earnest, and the forces they believed they had mastered were now turning against them relentlessly. The storm was no longer a warning. It was here, consuming everything. The catastrophe, beginning with trembling earth and restless seas, now revealed its most terrifying face, fire from the heavens. It started as streaks of light across the night sky, dazzling arcs that lingered far longer than natural meteors. People gathered in awe, believing them celestial wonders, gifts from the gods. But scholars saw something else, fragments of a greater body, a harbinger of destruction hurtling toward the earth. Then the sky ignited. A blinding flash tore across the horizon, brighter than 1,000 suns. Towers crumbled under the shockwave. Canals boiled as heat seared the land, and the air itself seemed to burn. The heavens unleashed their fury. The first advanced society stood powerless beneath it. Fire rained down in torrents. Mountains glowed red, peaks shattered, forests erupted into walls of flame. Cities were reduced to ash. People screamed, fleeing in desperation. There was nowhere to run. This catastrophe was not a battle. It was annihilation. Priests cried out that gods had struck them down. Rulers shouted of punishment for arrogance. But Thoth's teachings, preserved in whispers, suggested something chilling. Not divine wrath, but a cycle, a reset, a force from beyond the stars that had erased civilizations before and would erase them again. The fire did not relent. It consumed monuments, shattered machines, and silenced the brilliance of a society that believed itself eternal. In a single generation, their legacy was undone. Atlantis would rise later, inheriting fragments of their wisdom. But in this moment, the first advanced society was gone, erased by fire from above. The storm was no longer a warning. It was devastation. And the echoes of that fire still linger in myths across the world, whispering of a forgotten age consumed by the heavens. The fire from above had shattered the land, But the catastrophe was not finished. As the skies burned, the oceans began to move with a fury no civilization could withstand. It started with the tides, subtle at first, rising higher than usual, creeping into harbors and flooding markets. Fishermen whispered that the sea was restless, that something beneath the waves was stirring. But soon the whispers turned to screams. The oceans surged without warning. Waves taller than towers crashed against the shores, swallowing entire districts in moments. Ships were torn apart like toys, their fragments scattered across the raging waters. The canals that once carried life through the cities now became conduits of destruction, overflowing and sweeping away everything in their path. The people fled inland, but the sea followed. Rivers reversed their flow, lakes spilled over, and the land itself seemed to sink beneath the weight of the rising waters. Monuments that had stood for centuries disappeared beneath the waves, their brilliance extinguished in silence. Priests cried out that the gods had unleashed the flood. Scholars argued it was the aftermath of celestial impact, the earth itself shifting under the force of fire from above. But others whispered of cycles, resets that erased civilizations not only with fire, but with water. The rulers, once proud, now stood powerless. Their towers crumbled, their machines failed, and their voices were drowned out by the roar of the ocean. The civilization that believed itself eternal was being swallowed whole, erased not by conquest, but by nature itself. The oceans rose, and with them, the final chapter of this society's brilliance was written. Their legacy was not carved into stone or preserved in monuments. It was buried beneath waves, hidden in silence, waiting for the next civilization to rise and inherit fragments of their forgotten wisdom. Atlantis would later emerge, radiant and proud, but always fragile. And perhaps, in its brilliance, it carried echoes of those who had already been erased by fire and flood. The storm was no longer a warning, it was the end. The fire from above had scorched the land, and oceans had risen to swallow what remained. But the true horror lay when both forces converged. Fire and flood brought civilization to its knees. The cities, once radiant with crystalline light, became ruins in motion. Towers cracked under surging waves, foundations weakened by celestial tremors. Flames devoured what water could not reach. Smoke blotted out the sun. Day turned to night, and night became a canvas of chaos. Families fled inland, but the earth itself betrayed them. Valleys collapsed, mountains split. Rivers carved new paths through once fertile lands. Survivors trapped between fire and flood. Voices drowned in destruction. The rulers, once proud, now stood powerless. Their proclamations of eternity echoed hollow against their collapsing world. Priests cried out in desperation, chanting to silent gods. Scholars scribbled frantic notes, hoping to preserve fragments of knowledge, but their records were swept away by the tide. The collapse was not a single event, it was a chain reaction. Systems that had sustained the civilization failed. Energy conduits shattered, monuments crumbled, and harmony dissolved into chaos. The brilliance that had defined them became the very force of their undoing. And yet, in the midst of devastation, whispers of survival lingered. A few escaped the flood, carrying fragments of wisdom across oceans. They would become the seeds of Atlantis, the inheritors of forbidden knowledge. But for the first advanced society, the collapse was final. The Great Collapse was not conquest, nor gradual decline. It was annihilation, swift, merciless, absolute. A civilization erased, leaving only whispers in myth and fragments in stone. Atlantis would rise later, radiant and proud, but always fragile. And perhaps, in its brilliance, it carried the shadow of those who had already fallen. The storm was no longer a warning. It was the end. The great collapse erased the first advanced society. But not all were lost. Amid fire and flood, survivors escaped, carrying fragments of wisdom that would echo across ages. They fled across oceans, guided by ancient stars. Their crude vessels carried something invaluable: knowledge. Hidden scrolls, crystalline fragments, and oral traditions preserved secrets of a world undone. These survivors became wanderers, strangers in foreign lands. They spoke of fire and oceans swallowing cities. To others, their stories were myth. Yet within lay truths, warnings of cycles and resets. Forces erase civilizations when pride blinds them. A timeless warning. They built enclaves, carving symbols, teaching astronomy, geometry, and energy. These teachings spread quietly, embedding into cultures. They planted seeds of knowledge, seeds that would later bloom in Atlantis, a new civilization. Secrecy was essential. Revealing too much invited suspicion or rejection. They cloaked wisdom in myth, disguising science as divine stories and legends. Tales of gods and heroes were, in truth, echoes of catastrophe. Thoth's teachings hint at this hidden lineage. Wisdom carried forward. Knowledge preserved through collapse by guardians of forbidden truths. Atlantis, radiant and proud, inherited brilliance from these wanderers. Inheritors of a world already destroyed, their legacy lived on. Survivors carried knowledge and memory of fire, flood, and collapse. Though their voices faded into myth, their warnings remain. The storm ended, but its shadow lingered, a bridge between worlds. Between the civilization erased and the one yet to rise. The survivors of the great collapse carried fragments of wisdom across oceans, embedding them into new societies. Among these seeds of knowledge, Atlantis would later rise, radiant, proud, and seemingly eternal. But was its brilliance truly its own? Or was it inherited from a world already destroyed? Legends suggest wanderers who escaped catastrophe became teachers in distant lands. They spoke of geometry, aligning monuments with stars, and energy harnessed through crystalline structures. They spoke of cycles that governed both nature and civilization. To the people they encountered, these teachings seemed divine. To the survivors, they were memories, fragments of a science lost to fire and flood. Atlantis, in its rise, mirrored these fragments. Its towers shimmered with light. Its canals resonated with power. Its scholars mapped the heavens with precision. These were not inventions born in isolation. They were echoes of a forgotten world, carried forward by those who refused to let knowledge die. Thoth's teachings reinforce this connection. He spoke of wisdom preserved through collapse, of guardians who carried forbidden truths, and of civilizations that rise upon the ashes of those erased. Atlantis, radiant and fragile, may have been the most brilliant echo of all. A society built upon the inheritance of survivors. But inheritance carries danger. Alongside wisdom came memory of catastrophe, warnings disguised as myth. Atlantis inherited not only brilliance, but fragility. The same reliance on systems, the same pride in eternity, the same blindness to cycles. And just as the first advanced society fell, Atlantis too would meet its end. The question lingers: did Atlantis truly innovate, or merely preserve fragments of a world undone? How many times has humanity risen upon the ruins of forgotten civilizations, only to fall again? Atlantis was not the first. It was the heir, and perhaps it was destined to repeat the same fate. Among the fragments of wisdom carried forward from the survivors, one name emerges again and again: Thoth. Revered as a god of knowledge in later traditions, Thoth may have been far more than myth. He may have been the bridge between the erased civilization and Atlantis. Legends describe Thoth as the keeper of hidden truths, the guardian of forbidden knowledge, and the scribe who recorded the rise and fall of worlds. But beneath the myth lies a possibility. Thoth was not a deity born in Atlantis, but a figure who carried memory from the civilization before it, a survivor, or perhaps a descendant of survivors, entrusted with preserving fragments of wisdom too dangerous to forget. His teachings speak of cycles, civilizations rising, collapsing, and rising again. He warned of pride, of blindness, to signs of catastrophes that return when humanity believes itself eternal. These warnings echo the fate of the first advanced society, erased by fire and flood, and later mirrored in Atlantis's downfall. Thoth's connection to the lost world may explain why Atlantis rose so quickly, why its brilliance seemed beyond its time. The survivors carried fragments of knowledge, but Thoth preserved the essence: astronomy, geometry, energy, and the understanding that eternity is fragile. Atlantis inherited not only wisdom, but the memory of collapse. Yet even with his guidance, Atlantis repeated the same mistakes. Pride blinded its rulers, reliance on fragile systems grew, and warnings were ignored. Thoth's voice became myth, his teachings cloaked in symbols, his warnings dismissed as superstition. The cycle continued. Was Thoth truly a god? Or was he the last echo of a civilization erased, a guardian of memory who became immortal through myth? The answer may never be clear, but his presence connects Atlantis to something far older, reminding us that knowledge is never born in isolation. It is carried forward, preserved through collapse, waiting for the next civilization to rise. Thoth was not only the scribe of Atlantis, he was the messenger of a forgotten world. The story of the first advanced society, erased by fire and flood, and the rise of Atlantis upon its ashes, points to a chilling truth. Humanity's journey may not be linear. It may be cyclical. Civilizations rise, flourish, and collapse, only to be replaced by new ones that inherit fragments of the old. Ancient records across cultures whisper of these resets. Myths from distant lands speak of floods that swallowed cities, fires that scorched the earth, and gods who punished arrogance. Yet beneath the myth lies a pattern: destruction followed by rebirth, collapse followed by renewal. Each cycle erases the memory of the last, leaving only fragments disguised as legend. Thoth's teachings reinforce this idea. He spoke of civilizations rising in brilliance, blinded by pride, undone by catastrophe, and replaced by new societies that believe themselves eternal. Atlantis was not the first, nor the last. It was one chapter in a repeating story, a fragile echo of worlds already erased. Consider the evidence: monuments aligned with stars long gone, myths of fire from the sky repeated across continents, and warnings carved into stone that speak of cycles. These are not coincidences. They are fingerprints of resets, reminders that eternity is fragile and that collapse is inevitable when pride blinds. The cycle is not random. It is precise, almost rhythmic. Catastrophes strike when civilizations reach their peak, when they believe themselves untouchable, when they ignore the warnings written in the heavens. Fire, flood, collapse, and then silence, until survivors carry fragments forward, planting seeds for the next rise. The terrifying truth is this: we may be living in another cycle. Our brilliance, our technology, our pride, all may be echoes of civilizations erased before us. And just as they fell, so too may we. The storm is not a single event. It is a rhythm, a cycle, a pattern that humanity keeps forgetting. And the question remains: how many times has this reset already occurred? And how close are we to the next? When the survivors scattered across the world, they carried fragments of memory disguised as stories. Over time, those fragments became myths, legends told in distant lands, separated by oceans and centuries, yet eerily similar in their warnings. In Mesopotamia, tales of a great flood describe gods punishing humanity, drowning cities beneath rising waters. In Mesoamerica, myths speak of fire from the sky, of suns destroyed and worlds reborn. In India, ancient texts recount cycles of destruction and renewal, where civilizations rise only to be erased by cosmic forces. And in Greece, echoes of Atlantis itself remind us of a radiant society undone by catastrophe. These myths are not isolated. They are fingerprints of the same forgotten event, carried forward by survivors who cloaked their memories in story. Fire, flood, collapse, repeated across cultures, across continents, across time. The details differ, but the essence remains. Humanity rises, believes itself eternal, and is undone by forces beyond comprehension. Even the symbols align: serpents devouring the world, birds fleeing the heavens, gods wielding fire and water, all metaphors for catastrophe. What one culture calls divine punishment, another calls celestial impact, and another calls the cycle of ages. Yet beneath the language lies the same truth: eternity is fragile and collapse inevitable. The chilling possibility is this: these myths are not imagination, they are memory. Memory of a civilization erased before Atlantis, preserved in fragments, disguised as legend, waiting for us to recognize the pattern. And if these myths are echoes of the same catastrophe, then humanity has already lived through cycles of destruction, far more times than history admits. Atlantis was not the first, it was not the last. It was one chapter in a repeating story told across cultures, across ages, across the world. The myths are not warnings from gods, they are warnings from survivors, and they whisper the same truth: the cycle will return. The destruction of the first advanced society remains shrouded in mystery. Was it the fury of nature or the violence of humanity itself? The debate echoes across fragments of myth and whispers of survivors, each offering a different explanation for the catastrophe. Some records describe fire from the sky, oceans rising without mercy, and land trembling as though rejecting its inhabitants. These accounts suggest a natural disaster, perhaps a celestial impact, a comet or asteroid striking the Earth with unimaginable force. The evidence aligns: sudden floods, scorched lands, and skies filled with ash. Nature itself seemed to rebel, erasing a civilization in a single generation. Yet other fragments hint at war. They speak of weapons that harnessed forces beyond comprehension, machines that unleashed devastation, and rulers who sought dominance at any cost. Could the brilliance of their technology have been turned against them? Could pride and ambition have led to a war so catastrophic it mimicked the fury of the heavens? The survivors carried both stories. Some whispered of divine punishment, others of celestial impact, and a few of human arrogance. Perhaps the truth lies in a combination, a society already weakened by conflict, undone by a disaster from the stars. Or perhaps the war itself triggered forces they could not control, unleashing destruction that consumed them all. Thoth's teachings offer a chilling perspective, cycles of rise and collapse, resets that erase civilizations when pride blinds them. Whether by nature or by war, the result is the same: annihilation. Eternity is fragile, and brilliance carries danger. The question remains unanswered. Was the first advanced society destroyed by the fury of nature, or by its own hand? The myths do not agree, the fragments do not align, and the truth may forever be hidden beneath waves and ash. But one thing is certain: whether by disaster or war, the cycle returned. Atlantis rose upon the ashes, inheriting fragments of wisdom and fragility alike. And just as the first civilization fell, so too did Atlantis. The storm was not random, it was inevitable. Though the first advanced civilization was erased by fire and flood, traces of its existence may still surround us, hidden in plain sight, disguised as monuments, myths, and landscapes we walk past every day. Consider the great megaliths scattered across continents, stone circles aligned with celestial precision, pyramids whose geometry defies coincidence, and monuments that seem far older than the cultures credited with building them. Could these be echoes of a forgotten world? Remnants of survivors who embedded fragments of knowledge into stone so it could endure collapse. Even myths themselves may be evidence. Legends of floods, fire from the sky, and gods punishing arrogance appear across cultures separated by oceans. These stories are not random. They are fingerprints of memory, fragments of catastrophe preserved in narrative form. What one culture calls divine wrath, another calls celestial impact, and another calls the cycle of ages. Beneath the language lies the same truth: eternity is fragile. Geological scars also whisper of catastrophe. Craters hidden beneath forests, layers of ash buried in soil, and coastlines reshaped by sudden floods all point to events far more violent than gradual erosion. These scars are silent records, evidence of destruction that erased civilizations long before Atlantis. Even our own technologies may carry echoes. The fascination with resonance, vibration, and energy flow mirrors fragments of knowledge preserved through myth. What we call innovation may be rediscovery, pieces of wisdom carried forward by survivors, hidden in plain sight until humanity was ready to recognize them again. The chilling possibility is this: the evidence has always been here, in monuments, myths, landscapes, and even our own science. We walk among the ruins of forgotten worlds, blind to the warnings carved into stone and whispered through legend. Atlantis was not the first, it was not the last. It was one chapter in a repeating story, and the evidence of that story surrounds us still, hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to see. The myths of fire from the sky, oceans rising, and civilizations erased are not just echoes of the past. They may be warnings for the present. If history is cyclical, if civilizations rise and fall in repeating patterns, then the question becomes unavoidable. Are we standing at the edge of another reset? Look around. Our world is radiant with technology, shimmering with towers of glass and steel, and pulsing with energy drawn from forces we barely understand. We map the heavens with precision, harness power from the earth, and believe ourselves eternal. Yet these are the same illusions held by civilizations before us, illusions shattered by catastrophe. The signs are unsettling. Climate shifts grow more violent, oceans rise inch by inch, storms intensify beyond prediction. The earth trembles in places long thought stable, and the skies reveal anomalies that defy explanation. Just as the first advanced society ignored omens, just as Atlantis dismissed warnings, we too may be blind to the signals above and below. Our reliance on fragile systems mirrors theirs. Energy grids stretched to breaking, technologies that promise eternity yet falter under strain, and a culture of pride that insists collapse is impossible. But eternity is fragile. The cycle does not care for pride. Thoth's teachings whisper of resets, civilizations rising, collapsing, and rising again. Survivors carry fragments forward, planting seeds for the next rise. If the cycle is precise, if catastrophe strikes when brilliance peaks, then perhaps we are closer than we dare to admit. The chilling possibility is this: we are not unique. We are not eternal. We are one more chapter in a repeating story, standing at the edge of collapse, blind to the warnings carved into stone and whispered through myth. Are we near another cycle? The evidence surrounds us. The question is not whether it will come, but when. History is often presented as a straight line and neat progression from primitive beginnings to modern brilliance. But beneath the polished narratives lies silence, omission, and deliberate erasure. What history doesn't tell us may be more important than what it does. Consider the gaps. Entire civilizations appear suddenly in the record, already advanced, building monuments aligned with the stars. Where did their knowledge come from? Who taught them geometry, astronomy, and engineering? The official story offers no answers, only silence. Then there are the anomalies, artifacts that defy their supposed age, structures far older than credited, and myths that describe catastrophes never acknowledged by mainstream history. These anomalies are dismissed as coincidence or misinterpretation, yet they persist, whispering of a forgotten world. Why the silence? Perhaps acknowledging cycles of collapse undermines the illusion of progress. Perhaps fragments of forbidden knowledge challenge the narrative of linear advancement. Or perhaps survivors cloaked their wisdom in myth, disguising truth as legend to protect it from misuse. Thoth's teachings hint at this concealment. He spoke of knowledge preserved through collapse, hidden in symbols, embedded in stories. What history doesn't tell us is not absence, it is secrecy. The truth was never lost, it was hidden. Even today, fragments remain buried in plain sight, monuments aligned with vanished stars, myths of fire and flood repeated across continents, geological scars that speak of sudden catastrophe. Yet, history books remain silent, offering neat timelines that ignore the the chaos beneath. The chilling possibility is this: history is not a record of truth, it is a record of survival. Survivors decide what is remembered, what is erased, and what is disguised. The story of the first advanced society, erased before Atlantis, is not told in textbooks. It is whispered in myths, carved into stone, and hidden in silence. What history doesn't tell us is that eternity is fragile, cycles repeat, and collapse is inevitable. The question is not whether it happened before. The question is whether it is happening again. The story of the first advanced civilization, its collapse, and the rise of Atlantis has carried us through fire, flood, and silence. Yet the final revelation is not about the past, it is about the present. The evidence hidden in plain sight, the myths repeated across cultures, and the cycles described by Thoth all point to one truth: humanity is not unique. We are not eternal. We are one more chapter in a repeating story, standing at the edge of collapse, blind to the warnings carved into stone and whispered through legend. The survivors of the great collapse carried fragments of wisdom forward, planting seeds that blossomed in Atlantis. Atlantis, radiant and proud, carried those fragments further, only to fall again. And now we carry echoes of both building towers that shimmer with light, harnessing forces we barely understand. We are living in another cycle. The question is not whether collapse will come, but when. And when it does, survivors will carry fragments forward, planting seeds for the next rise. The story will repeat, as it always has, as it always will. The storm is not the end. It is the rhythm of history. Good night.